to say about me. I love to sing and I love women.
Dean Martin wasn't just a singer or an actor, he was a whole mood. Cool, calm, and always collected, he ruled Hollywood with a drink in his hand and a joke on his lips. But behind that easy charm was a life full of pain, loss, and quiet suffering. He climbed to the top, but the price he paid was heavy. From a complicated love life to the tragic death of his son, and later his beloved wife, Dean's story turned from glamorous to gut-wrenching. Join us as we take a deep look at the man behind the legend, his life, his love, and the sorrow that followed, leading up to his own death in 1995. The boy from Steubenville. Dean Martin was not always Dean Martin. He was born Dino Paul Crocetti on June 7, 1917, in Steubenville, Ohio. His family came from Italy. His father, Gaetano Crocetti, worked as a barber, and his mother, Angela, was born in Ohio to Italian parents. Dino grew up in a house where only Italian was spoken. In fact, he didn't learn English until he was 5 years old. Because of this, Dino had a rough time in school. He couldn't speak English well, so other kids bullied him. His early school years were hard. He felt different. Later, he said that school just wasn't for him. He once joked, "I had a bicycle and I never missed a meal, but I was just too smart for those teachers in school." That line made people laugh, but it also said something deeper. He didn't feel like he fit in. By the time he reached the 10th grade, he had enough. He dropped out of school and left the classroom behind for good. That decision took him down a very different path, one filled with hard work, risks, and rough jobs. Fighting for a future. After leaving school, Dino tried to follow in his father's footsteps. His dad wanted him to become a barber, but Dino had other ideas. He worked many small jobs to get by. Gas station helper, milkman, and even drugstore clerk, but these jobs didn't excite him. What caught his attention was boxing. Dino started fighting under the name Kid Crochet. It was a tough way to earn money. He said he fought in 12 matches and won all but 11, which means he only won one. Even though he didn't win much, the experience left physical marks. He got a broken nose, a scarred lip, and shattered knuckles because he couldn't even afford the hand wraps that boxers usually used. But Dean wasn't just fighting in the ring. When he moved to New York City, he lived with another struggling entertainer named Sonny King. Both young men were chasing dreams, but they needed money to survive. So they came up with an unusual plan. They turned their small apartment into a kind of underground fight club. They charged people to watch them bare-knuckle box right there in their living room. The fights would go on until someone got knocked out. Dean even knocked out Sonny in the first round of a real match once. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the life he wanted. Getting beat up every day wasn't a real future. He needed a change, but he didn't know what yet. From smoke-filled rooms to singing on stage. After giving up boxing, Dino still had to find work. He ended up in a place just as shady, a secret casino behind a tobacco shop. It was illegal, but it paid. He worked as a roulette stickman and blackjack dealer. It was here, in this smoke-filled world, that something unexpected happened. Dino started to sing. At first, he just sang for his co-workers, but people began to notice his voice. It was smooth, warm, and full of charm. One of the people who heard him was Ernie McKay, the leader of a local band. He offered Dino a spot in the band. Dino said yes, and his life started to change. He began performing in nightclubs around Ohio, using the name Dino Martini, inspired by opera singer Nino Martini. In 1938, he joined Sammy Watkins, another well-known band leader. Watkins took him on tour and gave him one piece of advice that would shape his future. Change your name to Dean Martin. and so he did. By 1943, Dean was living in New York and performing full-time. But it wasn't easy. He had to work hard to get noticed, and he had to keep shaping his image. He wasn't just building a music career, he was building a persona, and that persona would soon become world famous. As Dean Martin became more well-known, so did his act. He didn't just sing, he performed. He would walk on stage holding a glass of whiskey, always looking relaxed and smooth. He made it seem like he was just there to have a good time. But that act wasn't his own idea. He copied the style from a man named Phil Harris, a performer who built his image around being a hard-drinking, woman-chasing showman. Still, Dean made the look his own. His fans loved him for it. He became known as the King of Cool. But what people saw on the outside didn't always match what was happening inside. Dean was quiet. He didn't talk much, especially at parties or big events. In a rare interview with Oriana Fallaci in 1967, he explained why. "Everybody thought I was big-headed and stuck up, and I wasn't," he said. "I don't know what to say to people. I didn't know how to speak good English." Even though he had become a star, his struggles with language from childhood still made him feel out of place. That's why he often stayed silent. People misunderstood him. They thought he was cold or distant. But really, he was just shy. And that shyness never fully went away. His life was full of contrast. On stage, he was confident and funny. Off stage, he was quiet and unsure. But he never forgot where he came from. That mix of tough beginnings and inner struggle stayed with him his whole life. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. In August 1944, Dean Martin's career took a big turn. He met a young comedian named Jerry Lewis at the Belmont Plaza Hotel in New York. Dean was performing at the hotel's Glass Hat Club when he spotted Jerry and said, "Hey, I saw your act. You're a funny kid." That one comment started a partnership that would last for the next 10 years. Dean and Jerry quickly became friends. They joined each other's acts and formed a team. Their first performance together was in Atlantic City at the 500 Club on July 24, 1946. But their debut didn't go well. The crowd didn't laugh, and the club owner, Skinny D'Amato, warned them they'd be fired if the next show wasn't better. So, they rushed to the alley behind the club and came up with a new plan. Jerry would act like a clumsy busboy while Dean tried to sing. Jerry would drop dishes, cause chaos, and Dean would throw bread rolls at him. It was wild, silly, and funny, and the audience loved it. This new act changed their careers. They did slapstick, cracked jokes, and made up scenes on the spot. They didn't care about the crowd, they performed for each other. And that's what made people laugh the most. The act grew bigger. They got shows all along the East Coast. Their biggest early gig was at the Copacabana in New York. They became a hit. In 1948, they made their TV debut on the first episode of The Ed Sullivan Show, then called The Toast of the Town, performing alongside big names like Rogers and Hammerstein. To improve their act even more, they hired young writers, Norman Lear and Ed Simmons. These writers helped them move from nightclubs to radio and film. In 1949, they signed a movie deal with Paramount for My Friend Irma, where they served as comic relief. But the deal came with freedom. Their agent, Abby Greschler, made sure they could make one movie a year through their own company, York Productions. On top of that, they kept full control over their club shows, records, radio, and TV appearances. This helped them earn millions. In his book, Dean and Me, Jerry Lewis wrote, "Dean was one of the great comic geniuses of all time." Their friendship was deep. Jerry was even best man when Dean got remarried in 1949. But behind the laughs, cracks were forming. When the laughter started to fade. Despite their success, things weren't perfect. Critics started to complain that their movies were too similar. Dean got tired of playing the same role in every film. He wanted more. He started putting less energy into their performances. While shooting Three Ring Circus in 1954, a photo was published on the cover of Look magazine. It featured Jerry Lewis and actress Cherie North, but Dean had been cut out of the picture. That was the last straw. According to their publicity manager, Jack Keller, Dean stormed onto the set holding the magazine. He threw it in Keller's face and cursed him out. Jerry Lewis remembered Dean's mood changing. One day, Dean said, "Anytime you want to call it quits, just let me know." The fun was gone. Dean didn't feel like part of the show anymore. He said later, "Why the hell should I come in on time? There's not a damn thing for me to do." He felt like a background act, not an equal partner. In Three Ring Circus, Dean didn't even sing until 35 minutes into the film, and when he did, it was an old tune, "It's a Big, Wide, Wonderful World," sung to animals. The partnership that once felt magical now felt one-sided. Dean stayed professional and worked until the contract ended, but the breakup came on July 25, 1956, exactly 10 years after they first teamed up. Dean walked away quietly, but with his head held high. Life with the Rat Pack. After parting ways with Jerry Lewis, Dean didn't slow down. He focused on his singing and acting career and soon became a big name in Las Vegas. There, he joined a group of entertainers known as the Rat Pack. The crew included Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford. They were known for their classy, party-filled lifestyle, late nights, laughter, and liquor. But while the group loved the wild life, Dean wasn't exactly like them. To outsiders, Dean looked like the wildest of them all. Sinatra once joked, "He's got a tan because he found a bar with a skylight," but that wasn't true. In real life, Dean wasn't much of a partier. While the rest of the pack stayed out until morning, Dean was often the first to leave. He liked doing things his way. Tom Dreesen, a comedian who opened for Sinatra, said that Dean's quiet style often annoyed Frank. But over time, Sinatra respected him more because of it. Dean wasn't trying to fit in. He did what felt right for him. Dean and Frank had a deep friendship. Dean's daughter, Diana, once said, "To watch them on stage together was brilliant because you could see the love in their eyes, the respect for each other." Their bond wasn't just for show. Their families were close too. They were more like brothers than just co-stars. But even close friendships can be tested. The mob, the drinks, and the act behind the man. Dean Martin may have become a smooth Hollywood icon, but his past was far from clean. Before fame, he had worked as a bootlegger and even fought in bare-knuckle boxing matches. So when he started performing for mob-connected crowds alongside the Rat Pack, he wasn't shaken like others. He had already seen the darker side of life. While Frank Sinatra had deep ties with the mob, and most of the Rat Pack stayed polite and quiet around gangsters, Dean didn't play by their rules. After one performance, a group of mobsters came up to him and said, "We want to thank you for helping us out." Dean didn't smile. He simply looked them straight in the eye and replied, "No, I did it for Frank," and walked away. That bold moment showed Dean's past hadn't left him weak. It made him fearless. Dean also had a public image that made him look like a heavy drinker. He was almost always seen with a whiskey glass in hand on stage. Fellow Rat Pack member Sammy Davis Jr. once joked, "If this don't straighten my hair, nothing will." But in truth, the glass held Martinelli's apple juice. It was all part of the act. Dean's slurred speech and tipsy manner were fake. His backup singer, Patty Gribbo, said it was just showbiz. Even Jerry Lewis backed that up in an interview. Dean himself once told the Saturday Evening Post that he drank about 1/10 as much as I pretend to. Speaking of which, Dean Martin's charm wasn't just in his voice, it was in how effortless he seemed. The Dean Martin Show. When NBC offered him his own variety show in the mid-1960s, Dean agreed, but only on his own terms. He told them he'd only work on Sundays, didn't want to rehearse, and wanted to own the show after it aired once. NBC said yes. And did you know that Dean didn't attend rehearsals? Instead, he had a stand-in go through the entire routine with dancers and guests. Sometimes, if there wasn't a football game on TV, Dean would watch the rehearsal on a monitor from his dressing room. But once cameras rolled, Dean was there, smooth, relaxed, and totally in control. That show, The Dean Martin Show, ran from 1965 to 1974 and pulled in 40 million viewers. People loved the way he seemed so natural. Dean once explained, "The reason this show is a hit is that it's me up there on that screen. It ain't nothing phony. That's really me." He became so cool that even Elvis Presley looked up to him. Though Elvis had a tense relationship with singers like Sinatra, he admired Dean. Dean was one of Elvis's singing idols in the early 1950s. Elvis even sang Dean's hit, "Everybody Loves Somebody," at a concert, with Dean in the audience. Dean may not have been a reader, but he loved comic books. In fact, the only full book he ever read was Black Beauty. He once said, "If you have luck, you don't have to be smart." That line matched his easygoing image perfectly. He read comics well into adulthood. One of the few times he was starstruck was when he met Bob Kane, the man who created Batman. And Dean even starred in his own comic series with Jerry Lewis. Their series, The Adventures of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, ran for 40 issues between 1952 and 1957. A quiet star with a heavy heart. In 1987, tragedy struck. Dean's son, Dean Paul Martin, died in a plane crash. It broke Dean's heart. He pulled back from many things, including his friendship with Sinatra. He even walked out on their tour. That's when the distance began. Tom Dreesen later said that this was the moment when the two began to drift apart. Dean had lost a piece of himself, but in time, the two men made up. They didn't let that rift last forever. After Dean died, Frank Sinatra gave a touching tribute. He said, "Dean has been like the air I breathe, always there, always close by. He was my brother not by blood, but by choice." Even with all the success, the TV shows, and the records, Dean Martin stayed humble. He never chased attention. In 1965, he started The Dean Martin Show, a variety show where he sang, joked, and always looked relaxed. The show became a hit because of Dean's easygoing charm. He made it look effortless. From 1974 to 1984, he hosted the Dean Martin Celebrity Roast, where stars, comedians, and even politicians were teased in good fun. It became another fan favorite. Dean stayed active, performing on stages, in nightclubs, and recording music. By the end of his career, he had appeared in 85 films and TV shows and sold over 12 million records in the US alone, over 50 million worldwide. His voice became part of American culture. Songs like "That's Amore," "Sway," "Volar," so "Everybody Loves Somebody," and "Ain't That a Kick in the Head" are still played today. Dean Martin gave the world laughter, music, and memories. But behind all that, he carried more weight than most people ever knew. And it was related to his personal life, too. Dean's first love and the start of a big family. Dean Martin got married for the first time in 1941. His bride was Elizabeth Ann Betty McDonald. She was his first love and the woman who helped him build his family during the early years of his career. Betty and Dean lived together in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, after their wedding. Not long after, they started having kids. Their first child, Craig, was born in 1941. Then came Claudia, in 1944, Gail in 1945, and Diana in 1948. That made 4 children, 1 boy and 3 girls. But the marriage didn't last. After 8 years together, they decided to go their separate ways in 1949. Dean won custody of all 4 kids, and Betty moved to the San Francisco area after the divorce. She stayed out of the spotlight and passed away in 1989. Betty's time with Dean may have ended early, but she was there during the time he was still building his name. She helped raise the first half of the large family he would become known for, and their children would stay close to Dean even after the split. But Dean's life changed again soon after Betty left his life, for someone who would be much more than just his second wife. The wife who stood by Dean for 24 years. Only a week after Dean's divorce from Betty was final, he got married again. His second wife was Jean Beager, a model and former Orange Bowl queen. They got married on September 1st, 1949, at the home of a famous Hollywood club owner. Jerry Lewis was Dean's best man. Jean had met Dean the year before on New Year's Eve at a club in Miami. She didn't even know who Dean or Jerry was at the time. But as Jean told biographer Nick Toscas, "We locked eyes, and I knew. We just fell madly in love." Together, they had 3 children, Dean Paul Jr. in 1951, Richie in 1953, and Gina in 1956. Dean already had 4 kids from his first marriage, so Jean became stepmother to a big family. They raised 7 children in total. Dean often made fun of his growing family in his comedy. One of his most famous jokes was, "I've got 7 kids. The 3 words you hear most around my house are hello, goodbye, and I'm pregnant." Dean and Jean's life looked glamorous on the outside. They were one of Hollywood's most famous couples. During their marriage, Dean became a top singer, actor, and Vegas headliner. He also became part of the legendary Rat Pack with Frank Sinatra. But even with all the success, things didn't last forever. On December 10, 1969, Jean gave a statement saying they were separating. The divorce became official in 1972, after 24 years together. Dean was the one who filed. When asked about it, he gave another classic line, "I know it's the gentlemanly thing to let the wife file, but then everybody knows I'm no gentleman." Though they divorced, Dean and Jean stayed connected, especially after tragedy hit their family years later. The shortest marriage and the last wedding. Dean didn't stay single for long. In the same year he divorced Jean, 1973, he got married again. This time, it was to Catherine Hahn, a Beverly Hills salon receptionist. They were introduced by a family friend and soon decided to tie the knot. Their wedding was grand, filled with Hollywood stars, including Frank Sinatra. But while the wedding was big, the marriage was not meant to last. Dean and Catherine stayed together for just 3 years, divorcing in 1976. Though they didn't have any children together, Dean adopted Catherine's daughter, Sasha, and treated her as his own. After this, Dean was done with marriage. He never married again in the final 19 years of his life. Catherine was his last wife. But what's interesting is that after his split from Catherine, Dean reconnected with Jean. They weren't married again, but they spent time together, especially after the heartbreaking death of their son. The heartbreak that brought Dean and Jean back together. In 1987, Dean's son, Dean Paul Martin Jr., died in a military jet crash. He was only 35 years old. Dean was devastated. The loss changed him deeply. This tragedy brought Dean and Jean close again. They had remained friendly after their divorce, but now their bond grew stronger. Jean stood by him as he struggled with the pain of losing a child. Dean had a hard time recovering from it, and many say he was never quite the same again. Jean and Dean stayed close until Dean's death in 1995 from lung cancer complications. On Christmas Day, the world lost a legend, and Jean lost the man she once called the love of her life. Jeanne never remarried. She lived a quiet life in Beverly Hills. In 2016, she passed away at the age of 89 after a long battle with cancer. Their son, Richie Martin, a musician, had died earlier that same year in August 2016. Dean and Jean's love story may have ended in divorce, but their connection remained strong until the very end. Even though Dean Martin was seen as a family man, not everything was picture perfect behind the scenes. Affairs, rumors, and one explosive secret. A shocking story came out years later in the memoir of Sandra Lansky, daughter of the famous mobster Meyer Lansky. Sandra claimed that she had an affair with Dean Martin while he was still married to Jean, and not just any time, but while Jean was pregnant with their daughter Gina. Sandra wrote in her book, "I had never seen anything like Dean Martin's masculinity. We made love 6 times in a night that wouldn't stop. I counted." She added that Dean wanted to savor every moment, and that they would drink Coke between rounds. They had what she called an unspoken pact to never talk about their personal lives during the affair. Sandra said she didn't even know Dean's wife was pregnant at the time. The public never saw this side of Dean. Most fans believed his image, the cool, charming star who was a good husband and father. As Lee Hale, musical director of the Dean Martin Show, once said, Dean's viewers knew he was a good husband and father, and the booze and broads jokes were just part of the act. But Sandra's story gave people a glimpse into a different Dean. A man who, despite all his charm and humor, had his own secrets and made mistakes along the way. He was never the same again. Dean Martin may have looked calm on the outside, but those close to him saw something change after the death of his son. According to author William Keck, Dean was suffering from more than just grief. He was carrying a broken heart. In his memoir, When You Step Upon a Star, Cringe-Worthy Confessions of a Tabloid Bad Boy, Keck shared how Dean's final years were full of sadness. He explained that even though Dean still smiled and joked with those around him, the spark in him had faded. It wasn't just the loss. It was the kind of pain that never really goes away. Keck told Fox News that Dean would often tell him, "I'll be back on that stage one day. You'll see me." But deep down, it was clear. He was done. He had no plans to perform again. His heart just wasn't in it anymore. People around him noticed this too. Close friend and impressionist Rich Little said it best. Once he lost his son, that was the end of him. That was a big part of him that died and never recovered. Those words painted the picture clearly. Dean had lost more than a son. He had lost himself. According to Jerry Lewis, that's when Dean really started drinking. Jerry said simply, Dean let himself go. The performance stopped being an act. The pain took over. He didn't talk much about it. He didn't seek attention. But those who had known him for years saw the difference. Dean Martin, the man who once lit up every room, now just wanted quiet. He pulled away from the spotlight and slowly faded out of public life. His final goodbye. In 1993, Dean's health started to decline. He had been a heavy smoker all his life, and that finally caught up with him. He was diagnosed with lung cancer at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Doctors told him surgery could help him live longer. But Dean refused treatment. By early 1995, he had retired from public life. He stayed at home in Beverly Hills, away from cameras, fans, and the stage he once loved. That same year, on Christmas Day, Dean Martin died of acute respiratory failure caused by emphysema. He was 78 years old. His death was felt deeply across the world. In Las Vegas, a city he helped make famous, the lights on the Strip were dimmed in his honor. It was one final salute to a man who had given so much joy, music, and laughter. Dean was buried at the Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. His crypt carries a simple yet powerful message. One line from his most famous song, "Everybody loves somebody sometime." William Keck, who had spoken to Dean in his final years, attended the private VIP funeral. Many celebrities came to say goodbye, but the moment that stayed with everyone came in the middle of the service. The room went dark. Everything was still. And then, Rosemary Clooney, a close friend and aunt of actor George Clooney, began to sing "Everybody Loves Somebody." Keck described the moment as surreal. In a room full of stars, it was a simple song from a friend that captured everything. A quiet, personal goodbye to a man the world knew as a legend, but who, in the end, was just a father, a friend, and a man who missed his son. Do you think Dean Martin truly found peace in his final years? Or was he always carrying that heartbreak? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.